Hello, friends. Today we are going to be chatting spoilers for A Frugal Wizard's Guide to Surviving Medieval England, I believe is the full title of it. And this is one that's, I think, going to be kind of interesting because when we talked about Tress, for those that were in that discussion, it was pretty much a lot of positivity. And I think this one's going to be a little bit more mixed. And I'm actually kind of excited about that. So I like to start with general thoughts, but I also want to include the prompt of who do you think the target demographic is for this book? Because I do think that that sort of played a role in my enjoyment, but I'll let Roger kick it off.
General thoughts. It was aggressively mid for me. Like it was not at all what I wanted from this book. I I don't know. I think it's because I didn't look at the cover. I don't know what it was, but my expectations were so not what this book was. I was not expecting like action flick sci-fi in book form. Like I think if it was a movie, maybe I would have liked it better sitting there eating my popcorn, but in book form it was just not the tea for me. And the target demographic, probably if you are somebody who likes accessible sci-fi, that like I don't know, like Project Hail Mary and like that kind of stuff, I think that's the target demographic of this book. Or like Jason Bourne or like big action movies with The Rock. If like that's your jam and you want it in a book, you're welcome. Like
Oh, I think you're mute.
I'm muted. Sorry, because I'm dumb. I'm the host, and I was like, I'll mute myself while Roger's talking. I was asking if you read the back where he actually mentioned Project Hail Mary and Bourne.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think that makes sense. I have more thoughts on that also, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk. Patrick,
Yeah.
what did you think?
I do have thoughts on that too. Yeah, but I can understand the Project Hail Mary inspiration or maybe the tone of the story, but I really don't see Jason Bourne in this one. I
Yeah.
really don't see it. And also for general thoughts, I actually almost DNF this book in the first half of it. I just cannot stand the jokes. It was too much. Too much. It was
How do you not
trying
see
way
Jason
too.
Bourne though, Patrick? Like the
You
same
haven't
amnesia nonsense?
but that's it. But
But the
Jason,
tone,
yeah, I expected this to be. I don't know why I expected this to be more serious somehow. I don't even know why, but it
right?
is not. It is so much more humorous than I expected, and Sanderson's humor can be a bit hit and off with me sometimes. Actually, most of the time it actually hit with me, but for this one, it feels too young. And for the target demographic, I think this is for middle grade. Yeah, I think middle grade. Yeah, that's in my opinion anyway. But the Project Hail Mary, I can understand, but not really the Jason Bourne one, in my opinion.
And if anybody doesn't know and doesn't know what I was just referencing with Roger, where I asked if he read the end, Sanderson does talk about having this white room story idea of that person waking up and not really
Mm.
remembering everything. So that's kind of what he was referencing there. Sarah, what do you think?
I thought it was okay. I don't know. Again, like the first half, I was like, I don't really like this. I started to like it more in the second half, but then I hated the epilogue. So that kind of that kind of
Well, it's spoilers. What did you hate about the epilogue?
I just feel like it undid kind of like some of the progress, like him accepting that he's not going to get his powers back or whatever. And then she's like, well, maybe I'll give them back to him. And it's like, but he just accepted that he won't get them back. So why would you give them back? And I don't know. And like the fact that he's like happy where he is. And she's like, well, maybe I could make a thing so he could go back. And I'm like, doesn't that, I don't know. I don't like
Negate.
that. Yeah. I generally don't like epilogues, but that just kind of like ruined what I liked about it, I think. And I have no idea what the target demographic is because I think it does kind of read a bit younger, but then some of the stuff I'm like, this is kind of like, would kids care about this? Like,
And it's a
Mm.
little violent at times. Like I'm not giving my kid, a middle grader, this nonsense. Like
yeah. So I don't know. The target demographic is not me.
Oh, good one.
And on that note, Sophia.
How to follow that up? I like Roger's aggressively meh because I feel that And it was the first thing that I read in April. So I think I read it all on the 1st of April. Maybe I read some of it on the 2nd. But the point being that I actually don't even remember that much about it, which I think says a lot, because I'm usually obsessed with Sanderson books. And this one was just, it was fine, and
Yeah.
I'm not like excited to reread it or anything. I will once the pretty copy arrives with all the art and stuff. But yeah, so it was aggressively meh, as Roger says. And target demographic wise, I think because Sanderson has such an accessible writing style, it's very accessible for any age group. I agree. I wouldn't necessarily give it to a young person, but I think the target demographic in my mind is people who are obsessed with things like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is the main comp I would find. I haven't seen any of the Bourne films, so I don't know about that. And I have read Project Hail Mary, but I'm not sure that I necessarily hugely see the comparison there, so maybe you all can help me out with that. But yeah, for me, it's very Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I liked, but small doses of that kind of vibe. Yeah.
When I first started, because I was one of those people that waited up till midnight and kept checking to see if there was an update in my inbox, and I started it and I was like, I don't really like this, and then I just went to bed and then I didn't finish it until last night. So
I finished
Wow.
hence why I mean, I'm always up late, but just last night, technically this morning, Patrick was like, go to bed, Elle, and I'm like sending out the link and stuff. So I had stayed up late and finished it. And then I was kind of going through and looking at quotes that I had highlighted and things like that. I think I felt very similarly in my experience with this as Patrick, where when I first started, I was really not obviously very invested. And then I did like it more as I went. I think I liked it a lot more when I sort of shifted my perspective, because I do think, similar to what Roger said, my expectations going in were very different from what I actually got. If I had to guess, and I'm not saying he literally thought out like, this is exactly who this is for and everybody else, who cares? But it felt a little bit like a young adult book, especially Sanderson's young adult, I think tends to feel younger in its tone and how the characters act and how they talk as well. He kind of hits certain character personalities really hard. And having that as a main character, I think, was difficult. But I think there's such a lack of young adult books with male protagonists that I could see this being one where, of course, girls could like it too. Anybody could like it. But I just find young adult, there's a lot missing when it comes to thinking of young boy readers. And so I could see this being something a lot of them would enjoy, because it is kind of like that start into the other sci-fi books, the ones that Sanderson mentioned. I can see it kind of being a stepping stone, a step up to those things. So I think maybe that was the target demographic, because when I go into middle grade, I don't expect it to be particularly serious. And I expect there to be maybe sometimes humor that's a little young for me. And some of the themes maybe are a little on the nose. I have a quote that I saved that I actually really liked, but there's a few quotes in here that felt kind of, for me as a 30-year-old, I was like, well, yeah, but it's still nice to see. But I feel like it would be especially nice to a younger person. The Cephawin and Alston listened to what I wanted. If they cared enough to call me what I'd asked them to, maybe they actually cared about me. Just that idea of how do your friends actually treat you? I think when you're young, just pretty much anybody that's willing to talk to you, you're like, they're my friend. And then when you actually sit back and analyze how you're being treated, sometimes you realize, no, this isn't how friends treat each other. And I think that gets easier to recognize as an adult, but as a young person, I think those kinds of themes can resonate a little bit stronger. So I think it was maybe I think we all agree that it felt young at the very least, whether or not it was actually. I joked, though, with my husband that I feel like Sanderson did these secret projects to trick us all into reading young adult books. Because
I disagree that it felt young. I felt like it was living out like the middle-aged average white guy who never got his when he was growing up, and he always felt aggressively mid, and now he gets to be the hero of his own story. Yes. And then
That-
his ex-girlfriend,
true.
who's like a monster who comes out of nowhere. I thought you were dead, but no, you were really sleeping with my best friend the whole time. Like, no, it's average middle-aged white dude who never got his and now gets his.
That
I apologize
part
if any
was
of these people are average white people. I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend all of you.
I can see that. I think that particular theme definitely is more rooted in an older audience, as far as like, oh, I messed up in life. But even just the way he's a gangster and he doesn't act like it at all. He's always like, oh hell. I'm like, what? You know,
Let's just say Sanderson has an inability to curse.
that's as far as we're going. Yeah, it was a weird balance, I think.
And like
'Cause-
Yelp reviews of trees. Like, do kids even know what Yelp is anymore?
Do kids know what Yelp is? Well, I am curious, how would you compare it to other Sanderson novels? And actually, Sophia, you were talking about this a little bit in your answer, so I'll let you go first with this because it's very different in some ways. But like Roger was saying, it also has some of his
Yeah.
humor that you tend to find.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like his humor is very specific, and I think he, you know, like he leans into that with Wayne, right, in
Mhm.
Era 2 of Mistborn, and this isn't quite the same as that, but it still is leaning into that. Can I call it dad humor? I feel like that's what it is. It's dad humor, and sometimes it works for me, and sometimes it doesn't. I think in this one it didn't for me really. But I think a lot of that has to do with the characters, right? So Sanderson is excellent at character work, usually, but these characters just did not hit for me at all. So I think that's where I struggled the most.
I wonder if that White Room story approach contributed, because I felt similarly where I didn't really connect to this character very much, and the other characters felt a little more surface level than we're used to getting with him. And the book was pretty short too, I think, which I'm all for short fantasy. I like having the mix. But having read some short fantasy recently, for me, this one did not deliver as well as I would have liked in those areas.
Yeah, I definitely think that this one, he allowed himself to go somewhere that he hasn't really been able to go with any of his other books, and that's why it felt so different to me, which is fine. You know, more power to him if he wants to try out other stuff. By all means, I just if this was a series, I probably would not be carrying it.
Yeah, I agree with with his humor. Normally, it never works for me, and it didn't work this time either. So I wasn't surprised about that. But I agree with the characters, and especially him writing in first person. I found it a lot harder because I think pretty much everything else, at least adult that he writes, is in third person, if I'm recalling correctly.
I think that's correct. We got kind of breaking the fourth wall with Tress, but it's not the same. Yeah.
Yeah. So I found it, I don't know, especially like the side characters. I'm like, I had a hard time telling some of them apart, like, because I just didn't feel like we got enough of them. And that normally is what I like about his books. So definitely not one of my favorites.
Yeah. I think for me, it is my least favorite by Sanderson that I've read so far. I mean, I haven't read his YA novels yet, the Skyward, Reckoners, and all that. I haven't read all of those yet, so I cannot compare this to them. So my comparison is really only to Cosmere books. So yeah, compared to those, this really feels like the weakest one by him. It was really hard for me to care about the characters, as many of you, several of you mentioned. I cannot even remember the side characters now. None of them. So yeah.
It's a little unfortunate when that happens.
Yeah. Who's the main character name anyway? Is it John?
Yeah, I can't remember either.
Hey, don't worry. I got you. It's John West / Runian.
Right.
And his friend Ryan calls him Johnny, and he doesn't like that. Hence the quote I read earlier.
Name as well, like, come on.
What'd you say?
I said it's just such a meh name as well. Like John West, really?
I told you, it's literally the average middle-aged white dude fantasy.
Yeah.
Down to the name.
I know. When his name was revealed as John, I'm like, Oh my god. Really? But yeah, that's my thoughts anyway.
Okay, so if I'm comparing it to other Sanderson, that's where I think I was really disappointed because I wanted to see him do something fantasy and magical that wasn't connected to the Cosmere and see what he could do with it. And instead, I felt like he didn't do any of his cool world building stuff. Usually, I find it difficult to compare elements of his worlds to other books because they're usually so unique and such cool ideas. But this one was literally like Total Recall. Like it was so like stuff that I've seen so many times before. And then it was like our world, but not really that interesting. The only cool part was like the nanotechnology, but even that I don't feel like is like that unique of a thought in like the sci-fi space.
Scythe by Neil Shusterman has those same kind of healing.
That's what I figured. I feel like it's a very sci-fi like trope. It's not really like his cool, unique ideas like Tress or any of that other stuff where you're like some of the things of the world building are just like so interesting and fascinating, and there was nothing to cleave on to in this book except maybe there was a little bit with like Norse-ish gods, a tiny bit later on, but like that was even that's not like, ooh, wow, that's so interesting. It's like, okay.
Woden, if a baby was trying to say Odin, you know?
Yeah.
That's what it a toddler. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that was pretty much it. That was like
That's pretty much
it. I mean, even Skyward, like the world that Spence is in, has cool, unique things to it that I haven't really seen all the time. I haven't read Reckoners.
I think with this one, my favorite world building parts were more so in the silly handbook, kind of letting you know how the purchasing of dimensions works and those things. Yeah. That part was where I feel like his world building was, because you're right that it was essentially just historical fiction.
And that's not even unique, right? Because that's very Hitchhiker. Like having that whole idea of the book is very Hitchhiker's Guide, and then the setup is kind of Total Recall. Like there was just so many pieces where it's like, oh, I've seen that here, I've seen that here, and I usually can't do that with Sanderson.
Right. I think little things, little details, like in the fine print of one of them, when it was like, can I get a refund if I don't like, and that was the main question, can I get a refund? And then the fine print, it was basically like, no. And stuff like that made me laugh because it was very capitalism at its finest, you know, kind of thing, and getting tricked a little bit when you're purchasing items. You really got to read the fine print. And I did like that if anybody listens to the audiobook, the way that she would read the fine print really fast, like when you're watching a commercial, an ad for some kind of medication, they read off all these horrifying side effects really fast so that you hopefully don't catch it. I found those bits funny, but I haven't read Hitchhikers yet. That's one that I've wanted to read for a long time. So I probably would say it's what?
It's better.
It's better.
Yeah, I've heard it's very good. And I think I saw the movie years ago, so I know there's dolphins.
It's not a huge part of the book.
Tiny. I remember the beginning, right, where they're all singing and they leave Earth.
So long and thanks for all the fish.
Yeah. That's what Sean randomly will sing to me sometimes. But as far as how it compares, so I have read Steelheart, which is the first in Reckoners. I've read all of the Skyward books, and I've read Rhythmatist. And for me, because Rhythmatist is a little different, it's less sci-fi, it's more fantasy, I'd say. I would say this one reminded me the most of Steelheart, and Steelheart is my least favorite thing by Sanderson I've ever read. So it was a step above from Steelheart, just because Steelheart had a little bit of the main female character was just there to be hot kind of feeling a little bit, and so I thought this one had a little bit more depth to its side characters and the love interest, and how it was more built on an actual genuine connection instead of just, oh my gosh, but she's so beautiful. So it did remind me a little bit of Steelheart, but comparing it to his other adult works, if that's what we're looking at in the Cosmere, I agree with everything everybody said. It just doesn't have that same, it has his signature humor, but it doesn't really have his signature creativity, I think, in the same way. And I understand that it's difficult when you have a concept that's been done before and you're kind of trying to put your name on that concept, trying to throw out your version of it. It's just hard when this is not his bread and butter. And so when you're going to inevitably compare it to other things that are similar, I think a lot of people are going to be like, I kind of like those other things more. Which is still why I kind of wonder if it is a little bit more youthful in tone, mixed with the I haven't done a whole lot in my life and I need to change.
And ripping arms off of people, like when it got violent, it was pretty like graphic violence for Sanderson.
I think that I always think about Mistborn and the part where there's just bodies everywhere.
Yeah,
I
but it
can't say
doesn't
too
describe
much
as
for
bloody as much. Like this one, like kind of felt much more like action flick with bodies all over the place.
You think so? I think Mistborn gets pretty graphic with the
Yeah, but it does it in such an awesome way that
the difference is it's
the
cool.
headbutting scene. Oh my goodness, favorite thing.
Well, plus it's a lot more like alien feeling species that he's killing in Mistborn. It's a lot of Koloss bodies, which you obviously there's reveals later. I know.
I know. I'm just saying in the first one when I can't say too much because I don't want to spoil things for people that haven't read Mistborn, but Vin goes to see people that she used to know, and they're just like all horrifically ripped apart. And some of the ways that a certain magic works is you're like, wow, that's horrific. But I get what you're saying, where it is more because there's a part where he goes to shoot a guy, and then he like empties it on the gun. He's like shooting him. I'm like, you had to do that many times? Like, I think in that way it was kind of like, now it's time to be cool, even though like Sophia said, I feel like it was
a campy version of that sort of violence, and I think it then comes across as more jarring because you're going from comedy moment to okay, you just emptied a gun into a person. Okay, cool, fine. Okay, moving on.
I don't know, like the violence in this one just made me feel more like John Wick, where it was just like excessive to be excessive violence, and it didn't feel as it didn't feel.
Oh, that's a good one. John West.
So
also, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm just thinking, you mentioned about the art, and we haven't really talked about the art, but I found the art to be the most refreshing part of the novel, actually. They're so beautifully done. And also, I love how the chapter, every chapter icon is different from one another. I think the artist really did a great job on everything inside the book. I cannot wait to see it in the physical format.
And the cute little wizard.
Yeah, that guy. I don't know who that guy. that little kid.
It was so cute. I think that was my favorite part of the book. Were those little. I just need somebody to make a comic book strip of those cute little comics. Just follow that little wizard on their adventures. We've already kind of highlighted this in talking through a lot of our other points already, but what are your criticisms? Roger, would you like to start?
That's all we did.
That's true.
I don't know. Like, I'm just so used to Sanderson having such cool spins on stuff. So if he wanted to do this kind of tropey sci-fi thing, it wasn't different enough to differentiate it from the masses, and it wasn't an amazing enough version of it to make it like stand above anything if it was going to try to be like more traditional like that. So I don't know. Like, I get that he's just having fun, and this was really just a project for him and his wife, and like I totally appreciate that. But also, like, as a book consumer of his stories, I'm like, where is your cool ideas and uniqueness? But okay, I guess.
It also kind of oh my god. It also kind of feels like I know that Sanderson is a huge fan of Terry Pratchett, right? It's like he's trying to really imitate his writing, maybe in here, because in Treasures of the Emerald Sea, he mentioned something like, I think, Good Omens. Yeah, I think he's trying to imitate that, trying to create that feeling in Treasures of the Emerald Sea. And in this one, maybe Hitchhiker Guide to Galaxy and also other Terry Pratchett's books, whether it works or not. I know that some people actually really love this one and consider it better than Treasures of the Emerald Sea, but I disagree.
Are they middle-aged white men?
I have no idea.
Roger, you're gonna. People are gonna be salty. You're not that far from there, you know. Speak for yourself, Roger. Is there something you want to tell us? Are you ashamed of the life you've lived so far?
Fine. Heterosexual. Are they heterosexual middle-aged men?
Oh, I see. There's an exception.
White men.
If only one of them was here, so they could let us know. You know. I feel kind of bad now. I don't know, because I'm like, maybe a lot of them do agree, and maybe they're like, it did resonate with me, and what's so bad about that? But then maybe some of them are like, I didn't really like it either, guys.
I'm starting fights in Elle's comments and then walking calmly away and letting her deal with it.
It's literally a white room story, you know.
Exactly.
So Sarah, what were your criticisms?
So I don't know if this was just me reading it and like reading it so slowly because I wasn't interested in it. But like the beginning and like all the words that he was using, I was like, are we supposed to understand what these words are? Like, because he kept saying scop, and I was like, what does that mean? Like, did I just miss it where he was talking about it? Was I supposed to pick it up and just didn't because I didn't really care? So there are some things like that where I was just like, I didn't like that in the beginning portion.
It took John / Runian way too long to figure out what ears was. I was like, buddy, come on. That's not that out there. We know what they're saying here.
Yeah. And just him, like, not like understanding that this isn't actually historical. Like, he's in an alternate world. Like, things aren't going to be exactly how they were in history. I just felt like he would always do things, and it's like, well, obviously it's different because it's not real. Like, it's not actual history, so why would it be the same as actual history? And he just like would always do things or think things, and I'm just like, you should understand this by now.
I feel bad because I feel like a big theme and a big message of this book is that because there's a lot of things about you're not stupid or you're not less than, you're just in the wrong time period, and it's like teaching you to believe in yourself even if you're not that most remarkable Nobel Prize winner or Olympic athlete, and we're all here like, he's so average. Everything about him, his name, his intellect.
I didn't say anything about his intellect.
Sarah did. Sarah's like, he's so stupid. How is he not figuring this out?
If you got dropped into a universe that was obviously different from what you're used to, you'd think, oh, there are going to be some things that are different. I don't know. It wouldn't take me that long to figure it out.
Sarah would have been better off. I will say, I did highlight a part where it was like, I'm clearly from a more advanced dimension, so I can impress these people. And then he's realizing, well, everything I would do would just be showing them stuff that I have, but I don't actually, he's like, I don't even know if I know how to make a fire. And I highlighted that part because I put in my note, we're all really stupid, because it's like, it's true that I say to my friends all the time, you can explain how telephones work. You can explain how this works. And I'm like, how am I talking to my friends who live in different parts of the world? Like, it's just still baffling to me. So I did appreciate that part a little bit, that Sarah's a little less dumb than this fella, but none of us, I think, most of us in this chat, I'll say, do not have good survival skills. I don't know if we would have been inventing the wheel if we were in these really far.
Immediately dead. Immediately dead.
I think I would be scrappy, but I don't think I would be. I don't know. I don't think I'd be any. I wouldn't be discovering how gravity works. I actually think, I'm so sorry, Sophia. I promise I'll give you a second to talk. Anytime I do watch historical fiction shows or anything like that, and they are including things that were real to that time, I'm always like, everybody was smarter back then. That's what I end up thinking. Everyone was smart. They weren't dumber. They were smarter, because how on earth did they figure out all these things that we now just know that we didn't have to figure out? Does that make sense? Like, I just don't know how people figured out anything back in the day. I think it's all amazing. Anyway, Sophia, sorry.
It's okay. I feel like I could go off a little here. The white room thing does not work for me, apparently. The only other thing I can think of that I read with the same trope is, and this is not a spoiler because it's literally in the first chapter, is the 7 deaths or 7.5 deaths of evil in Hardcastle, depending on where you are.
I read that. Yeah.
And I disliked that book quite intensely. for various reasons, but I think that's possibly part of it. So maybe it's just that this trope doesn't work. But I think what specifically didn't work about it in this one for me was that why am I supposed to care about his life? He doesn't know who he is. I don't know who he is. It's told in a way that we're in his head, so we're just as confused as he is. And then that links to my other main problem with it, which is that I was so excited for this book because I did know the title in advance, and I was like, oh yay, it's going to be set in England. That doesn't happen super often. It was completely indistinguishable from any other medieval European style fantasy book that's ever been written. There was no way that I could tell that this was supposed to be set in England, not at all. And he supposedly did loads of research about what England was like in that time. And I'm like, really? Because it sounds like you just read a bunch of fantasy books that are the same and wrote that, because it's completely indistinguishable. So yeah, I was similarly to what Roger, you were saying, is I just find it disappointing, considering how good all of his other world building can be and how good his other books can be, that this just was not on the same level at all. Not on worlds, not on world building, not on characters, not on magic, not on plot. It really fell flat for me. I don't know what went wrong. I'm really glad that he had it as Secret Project 2, though, because if he had had it as Secret Project 1, I'd have been so worried.
Yeah.
And now that I know that, this is out of the way, this is hopefully just a blip, and the others were going back to the Cosmere, so...
I almost wonder if he knows that it's the one that's going to be the least well-received, because second is the perfect place, because you're coming off the high of Tress, which I think he knew people... I mean, it's a Princess Bride take, right? So I think he knew people would like it. And then you have the third one to kind of make up for a lot of us not loving the second one. If this is the general consensus, I guess I don't know outside of this chat, because I've been trying to avoid what
it
other
is
people
pretty
think.
much. There's only one person that I've seen that liked this one better than Tress.
Okay.
And they fit the demographic that I was discussing.
Oh my god. Roger.
Roger's never going to let that go. So you know what? I'm waiting for the book where you're going to be like, it's clearly for 30-year-old white women. And I'm going to be like, it was me. That's how I feel about Emily Henry's books, who writes romance, if anybody doesn't know. I'm like, I feel like this is such white women romance novels, but I like them.
I feel like
so
that,
I guess...
or the one where she's like researching dragons or whatever. I don't remember the name of those books.
What is that?
There's the lady who goes around and like researches dragons.
Lady
and it's, like,
Trent. The
Lady
Trent
Trent.
series.
Yeah.
That's probably also for your demographic.
Well, I'll have to find out, and then you can be like, well, it's very fitting. Anyway, going back to the order of secret projects. So third makes sense that you wouldn't have it third, because you don't want it. You want to have it sandwiched between two that you feel good about, and then I think the last one's going to be solid because it's the last one. You don't want to put it last and then have everything kind of end on a sour note. So I'm hoping that that's the case. I do wonder, though, even though Roger and I are clashing a little bit on our target demographic thoughts here, but if this was not a part of Secret Projects and it was just marketed as a young adult Sanderson take on the various different comp titles we've been mentioning, how many of us would have been disappointed? You know what I mean? Do you think, I know, Sophia, you said you looked into it beforehand, but I wonder how much we would be feeling the way we feel if we're like, well, because this isn't shady or anything, but like Patrick was saying, he hasn't read any of his young adult or middle grade stuff, right? Because that it's probably not going to be for you as much as his adult Cosmere works. So you might have just given it a pass and not really picked it up. So I'm wondering how different we'd have felt if it was, because so much about, I guess this is my criticism, so much about the Secret Projects is the secret of it all. Whereas I actually think maybe a lot of us might have gone into this differently if we had known what we were getting, and then that might have at least adjusted our expectations a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think? You feel that wasn't a conversation point I thought of ahead of time, but I am actually curious. Do you think you would have felt differently if you had been told this is a young adult sci-fi story?
I think if it's for me, I think I would have feel less disappointed. But in the first place, I thought I would have picked it up.
Right.
Yeah, but if I, let's say, I pick it up, I probably would not be this disappointed. Yeah, I already knew what I'm getting here. I knew it would be humorous and based on a lot of reviews, childish. Yeah,
Juvenile. Yeah.
yeah, so I kind of know what I'm getting into, and that's my own fault if I did not like it. Yeah, something like that.
Do you think similarly, Roger, or do you feel like you still would have just been like, no?
I mean, it would never have been the story for me in the first place. And if it wasn't a secret project, I would not have picked it up. It's only because Sanderson was attached that I picked it up. There was like no world that this story would be like a new favorite for me.
Yeah, Sarah, what do you think?
I think I would have been less disappointed, especially because I feel like because it's the Wizard's Guide, I feel like I expected a lot more magic going into it, and it's
Yeah.
really more sci-fi, and I don't really like sci-fi that much. So I guess I expected more magic and was disappointed that there wasn't. So if I had known more about it and was expecting more sci-fi, I could have prepared myself for that.
Right. Whose kitty is trying to join the chat? Is it Roger's? Is it
Katya.
Sophia's?
Yeah, it's Katya. I'll get her.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah, I think. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
No, that's Luna.
I know. Luna Bear's picture pops up whenever people have to close out. She's so cute.
Yeah.
She's been laying right by me this whole time. You might have heard her at the very beginning of the chat because she was making some grumbly noises, but I don't think she was too loud. But yeah, Sarah, I think like if it had said in the synopsis, and we knew from the marketing, this is a new sci-fi young adult book by Sanderson, or even middle grade. If it had said a wizard goes to another land, and then it made it clear that wizard is actually just a person from our world going to a different dimension, and therefore he seems magical, then that would immediately alleviate the disappointment because you'd be like, oh, okay, he's not actually going to be performing cool magic and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even that aspect of it has been done before because I think it was Angela who was talking about it, that there's like Wizard 2.0. There's like literally a book that does the same thing where it's somebody from a more technological that goes back in time or whatever and does it better.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what
yeah.
this-
What's the name? I forgot. Of the Magic or something. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a video game that is not good, but it's so not good that it's amazing. Called it was called something different in I think the UK. And oh my gosh, what is it called? It's one of my favorite games just purely because it's not great. And the concept is that this man is murdered, and then this homunculus gives him the opportunity to go back and solve his a shadow of time or something like that. Anyway, he gets to go back in time to try to solve his own murder, but then he can't just solve it the once. He needs to get to the root of it, and that somehow means that he has to go way, way, way back in time, and he's finding this like philosopher's stone and shadow of.
Are you talking about
Destiny?
Shadow Hearts or something?
No, but anyway, and in that there's a part where he like pulls out a lighter, and they're like, "Oh, he can make fire show up in his hands," and that's kind of what I kept thinking of during this book. Is it felt like that, but it didn't have quite the same cheese level as that because that was so cheesy that I kind of loved it. Because there's a part where he goes to a fortune teller because he thinks this fortune teller can help him figure out his murder, and she, as soon as he walks in, she tells him like, "I've been expecting you," in this creepy voice, and then there's a delay, and then he goes and then he gasps really like kind of feminine, and then he's like, "Anyway," and then he just goes to talk to her in a very normal voice, and it's hilarious. I think it's called Shadow of Destiny in the US, but anyway, if anybody knows what I'm talking about, it reminded me of that, but not quite as fun. I kind of wish, I almost wonder if I'd have liked it more if he could have bounced between dimensions, because it's not like we got to know the characters that much anyway. If he had to, I don't know. It didn't really click for me, but I do think that I would have felt very differently had I gone in with a different mindset. And Sophia, you touched on this. Do you think if it had removed the "it's in England" part of it that you would have felt differently?
Yeah, I think I knew enough about it going in that I wouldn't necessarily have had a different experience with it had it not been a secret project. And I would have read it anyway because it's Sanderson. I basically read anything that he writes. But I think I still would have felt similarly to the way I do. But I think labeling it as medieval England was a mistake because it's just not.
Mm,
It's just
mm.
not that. So that is a slight thing that irritates me, but it's not the biggest thing that annoys me about it. So I think I would have felt similarly either way. But I do think that wasn't the right choice.
Now, we've been pretty hard on the book. Let's try
Yeah.
to be a little more positive for a little bit. What were our favorite moments, if you can even recall any, since some of you are like, I don't even remember this book at all.
Who is John?
Who's John? Roger, I'll let you start this one.
I
thought you were
I liked
frozen for a second.
Yeah.
I liked any of the moments where we were interacting with the goddess. I cannot remember her name for the life of me, but whenever she was like kind of manipulating things and doing like things, that was the only parts that I vaguely remember and liked. That lady, yes. Lasagna. I liked her.
I had a feeling that she was not what she seemed, but I actually really liked her explanation that, well, you know, for a long time, women have to be accompanied where they go, and a lot of us die young. So if any of us make it to an old age, people just assume that we must be magical, and then now I actually get to have fun with that. I was like, that's hilarious. But then that was kind of thrown out the window, and it's like, I am actually magical. I was like, oh. I mean, that's fine. But I did find her enjoyable.
I mean, she was the best part, right? Just being a crotchety old lady, just wandering around doing whatever she wanted. Like, she's like, everybody thinks I'm a witch anyways. I'm just going to do what I want.
Yeah. I did like her character. I thought her character was slightly more unique than some of the other ones. Because some of the other ones, even if they're not that similar to other books, they're similar to other Sanderson characters a little bit. And she was a breath of fresh air, I thought. What about you, Patrick? What positive things or favorite moments did you have?
I think I did mention that I struggled a lot with the first half, but I liked it more in the second half. So although I still have some issue with the comedy and all that, especially every time John says something like, I'm rating this, how many stars, rating this, how many stars. Yeah, that one is super cringe. But I actually do like the themes that sometimes that bad things happen because we keep on thinking that we cannot do anything about it. I think that's a really good topic that will last through any age, whether we're young or old, and I really like that one. Yeah, I think that's really my favorite part, and we come to the culmination at the end of the book.
I actually had a quote that matches really well with what you're talking about, where it says, in real life, you lose a little, and that makes you wonder if you deserve to lose.
Yeah.
You get nervous, you make mistakes, overcompensate, that makes you lose more, then it compounds. I did like that quote quite a bit. There were a couple of good moments in the story, I thought. A couple of notable quotes.
Yeah.
And then he would rate something, and I'd be like, okay.
Okay.
And I once again feel kind of bad because he even thinks to himself, because Ryan criticizes him for rating everything, and he's like, this is who I am. And once again, we're like, he's so annoying.
Yeah. Why do people dislike you?
Yeah. Poor John West.
Yeah,
Good thing he's in this other dimension, because none of us in this one like him. Sarah, what were your favorite moments?
So I liked Cephawin. Is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
At the end, where she kind of like actually gets power and is like defeating all the Vikings basically that are coming in. And they have the illustration in there where she has her like fist up and she's like calling down lightning. I like that part quite a bit. And it kind of made me wish that the whole book was kind of like about her. Because I feel like that would have been more interesting, but I don't know.
She was interesting. I liked her. Sophia, you look like you're considering what you liked about it.
No, I think why it's kind of a cheat because you already mentioned it earlier, but I think my favorite part is the actual guidebook, handbook, whatever it's called, extracts. I liked those, and I particularly liked the narration of them. I thought that Kate Redding did a really good job.
You're okay. You just cut out for a sec.
You moved dimension.
the bits where it talks really fast. We don't have medication adverts like that in the UK, but we do have like insurance adverts that do that, and I thought that was funny.
Oh.
Well. So I think that's my favorite part, and the artwork in the actual
Yeah, agree.
copy.
I think I feel pretty similarly. I have mentioned already I like the occasional quote that we got. I did like some of the messages in the story, even if it's almost like just because John's super average doesn't mean he's not deserving of love. And that you don't. I just thought it had some nice themes in it, and I did like the occasional.
For the record, I never said he didn't deserve love or that
I didn't
he
say
doesn't
you
deserve
said that.
life.
I'm not coming at you, Roger. I'm just, it's more of a general tone that this chat has had. I did think that some of the themes were nice, but I mentioned before, the guidebook was really the part where I think I enjoyed the guidebook the most. The really adorable artwork I really liked, which is kind of sad that's not obviously the main story. One thing though that I thought was funny was Sanderson's always said our world does not exist in the Cosmere, but I'm like, this would have been the perfect way to tie our world into. Not saying like I would have wanted it necessarily, but I do think that's kind of a interesting conversation point that if I wouldn't have wanted this book to be what connected us to the Cosmere, but I mean conceptually, if he'd wanted to, he could have done that, and that would have been kind of cool. And then you could have had it somebody who goes to basically any one of the Cosmere's worlds that we've encountered, because those take place at different times. And so that could just be a different dimension of that particular solar system, I guess you could say.
And I think he's alluded to before that he's really wanted to do time travel, but it's so tricky to do time travel and have it actually make sense because it just messes with timelines and blah blah blah. So this is like his answer to that. He gets to do time travel by using an alternate dimension, but I do think that was a slight missed opportunity because he didn't do the time travel element well enough. I don't think.
I do think if he wanted, he could write another book in this world, I guess you could call it. And maybe it would be great, right? Maybe it would be like that one Cosmere book that we don't love as much, but we like all the rest way more. He could do that. It would be kind of an interesting starting point. And then also you run into the risk of, would you have to include guidebook information all the time, or would you just go a completely different direction and just establish, oh, this person is going to another dimension and not really elaborate too much. But what were your thoughts on it being non-Cosmere? I know, Sophia, you were saying you were originally really excited about this because you were thinking, oh, this is going to be a good opportunity for us to see him do other things. Are you glad it's not a part of the Cosmere? Do you feel like if it was, then he would have had more of that inclination to be, I feel bad saying it, but almost less generic, because he would have felt the need to think through a magic system and things like that? So what are the pros and cons for it being non-Cosmere for you?
I don't think this would ever fit within the Cosmere. It's just narratively, it's so different. Even though the humor is kind of towards the Era 2 Mistborn kind of side of things, it just tonally is so different. I don't think that this narrative or this story would have fit in the Cosmere at all. I mean, if he had made it a little bit more grungy, then you could kind of get sort of slightly towards Six of the Dusk kind of thing there, I think. But I think it's good that he didn't set this in the Cosmere, and he gave himself that freedom from the Cosmere with this one, because even though it wasn't my cup of tea, I think he probably achieved with it what he wanted to achieve with it, and he wouldn't have been able to do that if he had tried to fit it within the Cosmere. So I'm glad that he didn't do that, because I just can't see a way that it ever would have fit.
I think that's a really nice way of putting it. For his own creativity, it's good that he didn't. Sarah, are you like, I wish he had?
So the reason I was actually pretty excited for this book because it wasn't going to be in the Cosmere, because I am one of those people who's getting a little bit tired of the Cosmere.
Okay, I'm gonna pause you for just a second. Roger, Sarah's the person I was describing. So Sarah in our Mistborn era 1 versus era 2.
I was watching it, and I was
were
like,
you
oh
like,
my God.
that's me. Sarah is that person. And Roger was very like, I don't know what they want, Dad. And I'm like, I know there's people that exist.
It's me.
It's me. Hi.
So that's why I was excited about it, because I was like, finally something non-Cosmere, like let's see what he can do with this. And so it's like just another kind of level of disappointment that it wasn't good. So
By the
Read
way,
his other non-Cosmere stuff, Sarah?
What?
Have you read his other non-Cosmere stuff?
I've read like all of Skyward and The Arithmetist.
Does
And
that work better for you?
yeah, well, I'm liking Skyward less and less as the books go, but
yeah.
I did like The Arithmetist.
Yeah, Arithmetist is, I feel like, one of the under the radar books by Sanderson. I loved it, and I wish that there was a sequel, darn it. And he's probably going to have that one be written by someone else. And I was like, but it's one of my favorites by you. Yeah. Also, Roger,
It sounds like we are book opposites, because I'm liking Skyward more and more as it's becoming more and more sci fantasy.
Also, Roger and I are just messing with each other a lot of times. If people can't tell, we're not like actually butting heads or anything. We're just
trolling each other.
Yeah. Roger trolls me so much during like when we were talking about I think it was Way of Kings, and you're just like, so how about Adolin? And I'm like, why? I'm trying to avoid this. Okay. I know it upsets people. Anyway, Patrick, what are your thoughts on this being non-Cosmere? Pros, cons, what do you think?
I was quite excited about reading this one. I'm not fatigued by Cosmere. I'm actually glad it started connecting more and more now, because as long as that is good, I am always up for more. Not like MCU, let's say. I am so fatigued by that one, and I'm so done. I'm so done. And if the Cosmere ever reach that state, then yeah, it is a danger. But for me right now, it hasn't reached that state. But still, I'm excited to read something less, let's say, intimidating. Like, I don't have to remember so many stuff and Easter eggs from the other Cosmere to read this one. Yeah, I was excited for that. So I approached this one thinking it would be a one-off standalone novel. And I think right now it is right. But at the same time, it doesn't really work as a one-off standalone novel. Like the multiple dimension thing, as you said earlier, it would have worked, let's say, as a series of standalone novels.
Yeah.
Like the other book taking place in other dimension, I don't know, Greek or something. And then but they're all connected to one another. I think that would have been better, and in a way, it would increase this book somehow, a little.
I just don't know how I didn't think of this earlier. This is basically the Assassin's Creed franchise.
Exactly.
If he wanted to be, where he could just go any place and explore that.
Yeah, but well, I don't think he has any plan right now to continue with this world. So this doesn't really work as a one-off standalone novel. So I'm kind of glad that it's not part of the Cosmere, but I also don't think it worked well as a non-Cosmere.
I'm glad it's not. Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
So I don't know what to say about this.
I was gonna kind of bounce off what you just said by I'm glad it's not a book that when you're talking about reading orders that you have to be like, you kind of have to read this one. So that's a plus of it being non-Cosmere. Roger, what do you think?
I think if it had been in the Cosmere, it would have broken a lot about the Cosmere if all of a sudden we have this time travel component to consider. So, like, I don't think it would ever have worked or been written, but it might have been more my taste if it was in the Cosmere, because he would not have been able to write this book. So. But the thing about it being non-Cosmere is I just didn't want kind of mass appeal sci-fi from Sanderson. That's not... When I think Sanderson, that's not the thing that I'm looking for. I'm looking for cool kind of science-y magic systems, really interesting worlds, and like the things that I love about Sanderson are not present here. And so I was excited because if it was non-Cosmere, I wanted to see what could he do with like Arithmetist style magic or some other cool, just off-the-cuff magic system that he could make and have to not worry about it having any connective tissue to investiture. That would have been really cool. But that's not what I got. I got Total Recall meets The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it was not for me.
I like how so often we're ending every conversation point with, but it didn't work for me and I didn't like it. And or Sarah just
Well, you're
being
trying
like,
to make
but
us
it
be
wasn't.
positive.
Sarah being like, but it wasn't good.
Well, we have to add the prefaces because we don't have any unequivocal positives, which I think speaks a lot about how we all felt about this book. There's really nothing that we're like, this was a standout feature.
I would be very curious because you said, spacing on your wording, but you essentially said generic sci-fi, right? Is what you were like, mass appeal
I said
sci-fi.
mass appeal. I was trying to be less negative.
I wonder how this would appeal to people if Sanderson was a Andy Weir type and he already kind of had an established I started The Martian and DNF'd it. So I'm not actually speaking from experience here, but I write like kind of campy, accessible, fun sci-fi. If that was his thing, then if maybe people would receive this, like, I guess what I'm saying is I wonder how this sounds so negative in nature, but like the masses would take this in as opposed to us who have been reading his books for so long. We have certain expectations. We have things that we want from his works. So I wonder if this would be, because where I'm going with this is initially when I thought it being non-Cosmere, this perhaps once I read it, it could be a great one to recommend to people to start with Sanderson because you don't have this commitment, because it's a standalone. It's easy to get into. It's somewhat tied to our own world. It's got components to it that make it so that it's not as overwhelming. But then I read it and I didn't love it. And I was like, oh, it's not going to be one I can probably recommend to people more generally. But then now I'm like, but is it actually? Is it just that it's within the Sanderson fandom that we're disappointed kind of collectively? Again, just speaking as if we're all representatives of the Sanderson fandom. But maybe it's just within this fandom that it's not as it's not hitting as well. That makes me very
curious. It depends on what you're trying to give them an entry to, because if you're trying to give this as an entry point to Sanderson's broader works, I probably, with the thought that they're going to maybe move on to the Cosmere, I don't think that this is a very good representation of that. In the same way that I didn't think Tress would be the best representation of other works in the Cosmere, because they feel different. Tonally and scope just different. So if somebody's looking for like kind of palate cleanser, popcorn style sci-fi as like something to read in between heavier, darker, I don't know, because you're reading Dark Age or whatever and you're depressed from Pierce Brown or whatever his name is, this might slot nicely if you're the opposite of me and like sci-fi and want palate cleanser sci-fi. I think this might work for that.
I will add kind of, we are coming up on an hour, so I'll kind of start wrapping some things up here. I wanted to say a positive thing about it is I've
positive.
always as you're So I've always thought that I really, even if they don't always click for me, I love when authors take chances and when they go outside their comfort zone. And there's certain authors where every single time you pick up one of their books, you're like, I know what I'm getting. I think somebody like Sarah J. Maas is an example of that, where she's never straying too far from her successful formula. Yeah. And then there's other authors like Naomi Novik, where I really like Spinning Silver. And then Temeraire is very different. And then Uprooted, while still fairy tale-esque, I didn't care for. But I'm like, but I like that she goes for it. So I really like when authors take chances. They have that freedom with their creativity, like Sophia was talking about. So even if it didn't work for me, I'm still glad that he did this. And I know that there are going to be people that maybe the Cosmere isn't their thing, but this would be. So I like that he has taken that chance. And that he just kind of, we know these secret projects were him kind of writing for himself and his family and things like that. So I am glad that he wrote this the way he did. I'll also add, kind of tying what I was saying from the beginning, that I do think that there is a gap in young adults when it comes to having a male protagonist in the story. I've actually thought through, I'm like, what young adult fantasy sci-fi is there? And it's so hard to find any of it. And there's this really kind of snarky Reddit thing I saw where somebody's like, where are all the boys in YA? And somebody just replied, it's an adult fantasy. Like, that's where it gets shelved. It never gets shelved as young adult, even when it feels young. So I'm glad I'm glad this exists, even if, to be at this point kind of cliche, even if it wasn't personally one of my favorites.
It's just interesting though, because like, are boys feeling not represented in YA? Because like when I was growing up, I don't remember ever having that issue. I was just reading like Terry Brooks. I was reading whatever. Like there was plenty of stuff that had
So-
younger male protagonists that I didn't feel
To
not
that point,
represented.
I think our generation was one of the last where we didn't really have a solidified young adult section.
Yeah.
It was kind of just it went middle. It was called young readers in America. I don't know if it was like that in other places. And then it went from that to just figure it out, kids. Let's see what you like when you reach a certain age. And now
Yeah.
we have a formal young adult section. And I don't know if it is kind of that, you know, some of the older adult works that were written by women were starting to be shelved as YA, and then the ones that were written by men were being shelved as adult, and it set this precedent, or I'm not really sure what it is, because for a while, even Wheel of Time was being broken up because the books are longer into, they were splitting them and selling them as young adults, and then they eventually just shelved them as adult. And so I think for you, it's like what you were describing, it's because there wasn't like a category to tell you.
In Borders.
Yeah, yes. And so now though, it's like I almost think it creates this idea that young adult isn't for them, that they're not going to find themselves there, which when you're young, I feel like as adults, we should be happy to, not that you shouldn't when you're young too, but I feel like as an adult, you should be excited to read from perspectives that aren't your own. Because I think you've reached that point where you have kind of discovered yourself and now you're reading from other perspectives, other viewpoints, and it creates a lot more empathy and things like that. But when you're in your formative years, seeing yourself is so important. And I just don't feel like young adult, it's almost like, no, you don't have a place here. A little bit is what I would imagine it could come across as, kind of the same way as when for a while, it's much, much better now. But for a while, women weren't finding themselves in adult fantasy. It was like, what is there that shows our stories? And so I don't know. I think maybe I'm wrong, but whenever because I do like young adult and adult fantasy sci-fi, that when I think about it, I'm like, there's so few. But that's all. That could be a whole other topic. Sophia was going to say something. Go ahead, Sophia.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say, I think it kind of takes it back to the first thing we were discussing about the demographic. And actually, this conversation has made me think maybe what the demographic of this actually is people, it's aimed at teenagers, but teenagers back then, right? Like when we were teenagers and when he was a teenager, that's the demographic, but that means that it doesn't neatly fit into any particular demographic now, because
Yeah, that makes
teenagers
sense.
now are super different to teenagers 20 years ago.
That's true.
They just don't have the same vibe. And also in terms of his writing, I think we have to remember that he hasn't had as many books to sort of craft his narrative voice in this style. With Cosmere, we've got all of the published works plus the 13 that he wrote before that. So he's had tons of practice writing with that narrative style and voice. And this one, he's never written anything like this before. So it makes sense that it's just not quite there.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I thought that same thing when I was reading, that this is just, it's so different from what he usually does that it almost feels like it's a beginning, like it's his first book. It feels like a debut, I guess I'm trying to say, in some ways. It doesn't feel like the seasoned author that we're accustomed to, because he's not seasoned in this area. So I completely agree. I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent. I was mostly trying to just kind of bring in some positives here. Before I jump into final prompts, were there any other things tied to what I was talking about that anybody wanted to add?
I think for me, it is interesting though, because I think this needs to go back to the first time I read Mistborn. So in Indonesia, back then, at least for me, I didn't know about young adult, middle grade, anything. I don't know about any of them. I just said, maybe this one is for children, maybe this one is for adults, something like that. Sorry. And I picked up Mistborn really because somehow it just captured my attention. I saw it in 9gag. I don't know if any of you know 9gag. It's kind of like a social media platform where people make memes. And some of the comments mentioned something. So Game of Thrones was all the hype right back then. And some of the comments mentioned that you should try reading Mistborn. I don't even know what that is. And I saw a Vin in the front cover, and then there's some mist going on, and it just captured my attention. And then people said something like, this character digests metal, and then it became her power. I'm like, what? Digest metal? So that's it. That's all I know. There is no expectation. There is nothing else. And then when I pick up a book, when I bought the copy on my local bookstore, I pick up a mass market paperback. I didn't know that apparently this kind of format, they still have the same content. I saw that this one has the more page count, right? Mass market paperback. So, wow, this one has extra content. So I bought that one. And it's cheapest. Right? And I think this kind of expectation thing, after reading a lot of books, it's only after you read a lot of books that it starts to really matters. But when it's something new to you, it doesn't really matter, I think. Yeah, because you are still new to it. So thinking about it, Secret Project 2 might really work if it's something like a new hobby to you, if reading is a new hobby to you. Yeah,
right. No, I think that's what you described. I didn't think there's extra content, but a lot of the other things you described about Mistborn were really similar to my first experience with it as well, where I just kind of picked it up. I know the cover you're talking about, the older one.
Yeah.
Yeah, where she's just like very very emo Vin. But I think that's a good thing to note, that I wouldn't necessarily categorize all of us as chronically online, but when it comes to our book community, we do tend to be online a lot. We are discussing things like we are right now all the time, which is great for being able to express our thoughts, because sometimes reading can feel so isolating. So it's great to have that connection, but at the same time, we do kind of get sucked into this. We're told what we're gonna like, and we're looking for these specific tropes. And let me make sure we do kind of map out ahead of time. We kind of have an idea already in our minds of what we're gonna like, what we're not gonna like, what we should be getting from certain authors. Yeah. And we don't just kind of have that innocent, I go to the store, and obviously, let me finish what I was saying. We don't have that same experience as often anymore. A lot of us who are on BookTube or whatever, if you watch BookTube, but the Secret Project nature of it, I think, also contributed to not having that opportunity as easily. Yeah. Because we were going into it, we didn't know what we were getting, but we still had certain thoughts, because a lot of us who invested in the Secret Projects are already fans. And so we have an idea of what we think we're getting. So it was weird. It was like, it should have had that innocent, let's just go pick up something and see what we get. But it's Sanderson. We all read how many books now by Sanderson? So it's an interesting thing to note. Maybe I think it ties back to before, just our expectations not being what we got affected, I think, all of us to some degree, and affected whether we would have picked it up or not.
Yeah.
Very full circle.
I feel like Patrick. I would have gotten more information on those like blind date books at Barnes and Noble, because at least they have little words on the front of like kind of the gist of what's going to be in there. I feel like I definitely need to at least briefly peek into a blurb or something for the other Secret Projects, because I do feel like thinking Wizard going into this did hurt at least the initial impression of it, because I went in thinking I'm getting Wizard and cool magic, and I got not that.
The third one, I can tell you right now, Roger, I think all of us are going to like
adjacent, right?
That's true. But I think the third one's premise and the goal of what he's going for, I think all of us here are probably going to like. I don't want to say anything else, though, because I know some people really don't want to know. So I don't want to take that away from anybody. Last thing, since John West / Runian likes to rate everything, what would you all rate this? Sorry, it was very cheesy, but I had to do it. I think for me, I don't typically, rate books, but I think it was just, as Roger put it, kind of aggressively mid. Yeah. So very, very just, 3-star, I think, for me.
I think that's what I rated it to. I think I gave it 3. I think I started higher, and then just the more I thought about it, I was like, no.
It's funny because I think I was the opposite, where I was like, I don't really like this, which would have just been a DNF. But then in having completed it, I'm like, there's some good moments in there. There's some nice moments.
Yeah, I think I gave it 3 based on the narration and all that, but I tried to include the artwork as well into the equation. So I just kind of like upgraded a bit to 3.5. But yeah, if it's judging based on text alone, it's 3 stars for me.
Yeah, I ended up giving it 3. I almost gave it 4, and then I read the epilogue, and that brought it back down.
You really hated the epilogue.
I just read it. I just finished it this morning, and I was like sitting here like, okay, an epilogue, and I was like, oh.
Have you read the book The Wicked Deep?
Yeah, I didn't like it. I don't remember anything about it. But
The epilogue of that one, I was like, what the heck was this? I really did not like the epilogue to a point where it just ruined the book for me. So
Well, it sounds like Sarah just hates epilogues. I like them if they give me catharsis. I don't like them if it feels like it all of a sudden shifts what you thought you knew. So I kind of get what you're saying.
This one felt like it shifted what we knew. 3 stars for me.
Yeah, I don't rate things usually either, but on the basis that this was just very meh, it's 3. Yeah.
At least it wasn't just, oh my gosh, this is just obviously a 2 or a 1.
It was significantly better than House of Sky and Breath. There's a positive.
Don't get me started on that.
That's not hard.
I know
a lot
first
of
1 star I've ever given.
Well, Roger, you know the most one of the recent things I finished was that book Fourth Wing, and you know, I didn't love that one. So this one in comparison, I'm like, it's different. It's different.
That book is so popular right now.
Out of nowhere, it's weird.
Yeah, it's just suddenly appear out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna tell you now, Patrick, it's not your fantasy. I'm letting you know. I mean, I think it would be funny if you read it because you would be like, "What is this?" But yeah, it's kind of like if Hunter x Hunter was filled with people who really wanted to bang. That's kind of
no. No.
Yeah, that's what that book felt like a little bit.
Go get it immediately, Patrick, and vlog the experience. That is what Ella's really saying.
I have serious issue with people being lusty all the time. Seriously, I have being issue with those kind of.
I like that wording, lusty all the time.
I feel like we need to get a team up of Patrick and Alan reading this book together.
No.
Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine. It would be a lot of just Patrick shaking his head and a lot of Alan shouting.
Alan screaming.
Yeah. That would be
maybe the other way around. I'm the one screaming now.
For once. Yeah, Alan's just like at a loss for words. He has nothing to add. He just can't anymore. You know, he's so done. And Patrick is I did finish it. I knew immediately. I was messaging Roger like, oh my gosh, this book. And I was sending him my thoughts as I was reading, and I was like, this is just not great. But I finished it, and I was tabbing stuff because it's funny to me. It's my next A Game of Fate. If anybody doesn't know, I read A Game of Fate, and it's not quite the same. A Game of Fate is just pure lustiness all the time.
It's porn in book form.
And this was much more plot, I will say. And some of the fantasy elements were kind of cool, but they talked so weird, and the dialogue just wasn't my favorite. And it had very much the like, this kid wants to kill me, but also he's so hot vibes. And I'm like, I often am really attracted to people I think want to kill me for sure. Walking up home alone, dark out, and I'm like, this person's following me. It's a good thing they're good looking. I hope that's what they're interested in. Anyway, so on
do they want to stab me or do they want to stab me?
Nothing different from this book though. There's literally a part. This is nothing to do. This is very typical for all of us that we go off eventually at the end. But there's a part at the end, or not the end. There's a part in that book where they're sparring, her and the bad boy guy that she thinks wants to kill her. And he takes one of her knives and he puts it back in the sheath. And she's like, so hot. That's literally what she thinks in that moment. And I'm like, really? That's all it takes? Like, I understand the imagery here.
When he was putting it in the sheath? Like...
Oh, you think that is bad? I DNF'd a book recently. I'm going to try and keep this as PG as possible, but honestly. So the what's it called? Oh, the new Sally Thorne book, Angelica Frankenstein Makes her man or something along those lines. Anyway, I was reading it, and as the title suggests, it's, you know, Frankenstein's monster, but she's making a guy that she wants to marry. And she's just like the thirstiest character I've ever read. And no word of a lie, I'm going to use the word get off on, but you all know what I mean. It's a word beginning with O. She's hugging him in a carriage that's bumpy, and she gets off on it. And I'm like, no, that's it. I'm done. I can't anymore with this book. I was already this close to DNFing it. I was like, I cannot go any further with this.
Just like she was this close in that carriage, right?
Yeah, like, no, she wasn't this close. She went there. She went all the way there. Like, no, you're hugging him. Chill.
I don't know about you. Maybe you just never had a really good hug, Sophia. That's the problem. You're outing yourself right now.
I apparently need to go and hug my partner in a very bumpy carriage ride. That might be the experience of my life.
I always learn such interesting things about the way that female anatomy works when I read books.
Yeah, Roger's probably like, I didn't know that it could just be a hug. I didn't know. That's just.
I was like, I thought in media they always make it sound like it's so difficult, but all it takes is a carriage. Okay.
Oh my god.
Oh dear.
So on that note,
sorry.
No, you didn't start it. It's totally fine. You know what? On the topic of closeness, I'll end with this quote. So many people living together but not fighting. Killing is desperation, not strength. To live without killing, that is a strong society. And that came from Cephawin and, let me make sure I get his name right, Alston. The two. It's kind of a combined from their narrative. So, closeness is good. We'll end on that.
Really good. Really good.
Really good. Closeness is great. It's funny because I'm not a big hugger. Maybe I just am like, I don't want to experience that in front of other people.
That is terrifying.
Yeah. It's terrifying every day of your life. You're like, please don't hug me. You don't know what might happen here. Anyway, did anybody have any final thoughts?
No, I don't have
No?
one.
Okay. This is a lot of fun. And everybody's channels will be linked. And also, if you liked this random direction we went at the end of this video, there's a World Hoppers video where we talk about some of the weirdest scenes. I was sick with COVID during that video. And I was like, I feel like I was especially confused in that video because some of the stuff, if you think that's bad, Sophia, you should.
I can imagine.
The weirdest stuff, like Tetris. A woman has a relationship with like a Tetris block.
What?
An alien Tetris block.
What?
Multiple.
Something like that. I was like, I don't know if I'm processing what's being said. This all sounds almost too bizarre. It was very entertaining though. So if anybody likes the end of this conversation, you can go check out World Hoppers and that video. And then if you would like to see more Sanderson discussions, I will have the Trust of the Emerald Sea, the Mistborn one, the Way of Kings one. We'll be doing more in the future as well. But anyway, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to the co-host for joining, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.